Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. As the legislature works on crafting the state's next 2-year budget, many groups are feeling shorted. One of those specifically nonprofits. Joining me now to share some insight on what those groups are facing, Gian Carl Casa from the Connecticut Nonprofit Alliance. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, we've talked about this a lot, but I want to start off. First, walk me through what you're seeing right now. How are nonprofits dealing and handling this, and what are these groups experiencing?
I don't think people fully realize the level of crisis that nonprofits are in Connecticut. After 20 years or so of underfunding, of COVID, of an employment problem where they can't get employees, not insurance rates going up, inflation. Nonprofits are struggling to provide services. When I talk about services they provide, We're talking about people who do day services and group homes for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, behavioral health services, including drug treatment, services for people trying to make a new life after prison, trying to get skills and education when they go home, homeless shelters, food distribution places, things that really are essential to Connecticut's quality of life.
And have you heard any specifics from any of the nonprofits you work with about how they've already seen services impacted in the past couple months?
Absolutely. People need to understand that the status quo, if it continues, would just mean more harm to the people who need nonprofit services. One of our members said just this morning that he's closed 21 programs.
Wow.
And he's looking at closing 4 more. And while that's a big number, he's a big organization, we hear frequently from people who say, well, I had to cut back my hours. We couldn't do this program. I couldn't hire anybody. I have empty beds that I could use to help people, but I can't get the employees because the state doesn't pay enough.
Yep. And, we've spoken many times about how nonprofits have been asking the state for more funding for years now. You mentioned years of underfunding. Obviously, the last budget session 2 years ago, we dealt with the cliff of pandemic-era ARPA, federal dollars ending. Can you tell me what your ask is this budget session from the legislature?
Yeah, we came in January asking for a $264 million increase. Now, that includes keeping what was said to be a one-time payment last year from remaining ARPA money. It includes money for Medicaid services that nonprofits provide, and it includes a 6% cost of living adjustment. Nonprofits are, in terms of their buying power, still 30% behind where they were in 2007. Now, nobody can provide the same level of services with 30% less in funding, let alone when we're going into a situation where we may have high inflation again, where we may have a stagnant economy. So that means costs are going to go up, needs are going to go up, and nonprofits can't be expected really to provide the same level of services with the same amount of money.
And some people might see, $264 million. That's a lot of money. That's a large chunk. What's your response to that if people think, oh my gosh, that's so much money to be asking for from the state budget?
We wish we didn't need it, but people do need it in Connecticut. People depend on behavioral health treatment. They depend on having respite care. They depend on the things that nonprofits provide. I don't think people realize, every museum they walk into, every concert they go, practically every concert they go to, is being run by a nonprofit.
Right, it's really a part of so many aspects of life here. This year, you're also dealing with federal cuts, which, we mentioned other factors, but really hadn't been a part of this situation previously. How is that impacting the situation this time around to be, kind of in the same place asking for more state funding and then also dealing with federal cuts, and not just cuts, but also a lot of back and forth and uncertainty and confusion in some cases?
Uncertainty is the right word. Nonprofits are really in fear of what the feds may do. But I think when we talk about state government, there has been a lot of talk recently about using the money that the state has in its 8th straight year of surplus, using the money that the state has in order to make good on what it is the feds cut, to keep nonprofits whole if they're cut by the federal government. That doesn't do the job. That's status quo. And as I was saying earlier, that means more people are going to lose their jobs, more people are not going to get services, and the quality of life in the state is going to deteriorate.
So, you mentioned status quo when you mentioned funding from the state in the 8th surplus year. The big, term that we've talked about for years and years and years now, fiscal guardrails. We know they were re-upped last session in the short session in the in-between. Do you think these need to be tweaked and adjusted before Governor Lamont has stood strictly by keeping the guardrails in place? This year in his budget address, he left that a little more up to interpretation. He wasn't really as solid with, whether or not he wanted to move the guardrails. And we've seen growing support from Dems in the legislature to tweak them or adjust them, especially this year with the federal funding cuts. Where's your stance on that?
It is simply not possible to take care of the people that nonprofits take care of without changing the guardrails. And we're not talking about getting rid of them. Nobody's talking about eliminating the guardrails.
Right.
We're talking about making adjustments to make some of the funding available to nonprofits and others that the state has when it's been running surpluses year after year. I understand that people are concerned about what may happen in the future by the federal government or others, or how the economy may change. But every budget, a budget people do for their households, budgets people do in their businesses, government budgets every year, every budget is a guess about what's going to happen in the future.
You recently sent a letter to state legislators asking them to increase the spending for community nonprofits. Did you get any response from that so far? What does that look like? You're always a part of these conversations and lobbying with lawmakers, but have you seen any response to that letter?
A lot of lawmakers really want to try to help nonprofits when it comes to putting together the budget, but we have heard that before. Look, there are a lot of needs that are worthy, and they have to make decisions about which ones get funded. But it's also a decision about which ones get priority. And for many, many years, nonprofits have not been the priority item. It's time they are. They are 30% behind, again, where they were in 2007. And that just doesn't do the job.
You said lawmakers have said in the past that they want nonprofits to be helped. They want them to be a priority. Do you feel that shifting at all this session, even more so? Do you feel growing support from legislators this year?
Certainly we have, up until the time the federal government started making its changes. I think at that point people started hedging a little bit and saying, well, we don't know what the feds are going to do, thinking that they would use any extra money just to keep nonprofits and others whole. Again, that's essentially flat funding for nonprofits. And in a context of inflation and the context of a stagnant economy, when need goes up, that's essentially a cut.
Yeah. Is there, you mentioned that would really just be flat funding if they use that money to keep nonprofits whole. You've come out and said instead of hedging bets, which I've heard from lawmakers across the board that they knew going into this session with the uncertainty in Washington, it might need to be a wait and see game. You're saying they should just bite the bullet and do it now and commit to that funding. Why do you want them to do that?
Because the need is there and the state has the money. And the need has been there, and the state has had the money, and they haven't made the kind of investments necessary to take care of the people in Connecticut to provide the services that people need. I'm not saying that the state has not increased funding for nonprofits.
Right.
They have, and we're very appreciative of it. We very much appreciate the legislators and others who have fought for that funding. But again, we're 30%, one-third behind where we were in terms of buying power almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
the year of the iPhone.
Right? Puts that into perspective there. In the past week as well, the state launched an online reporting tool, not just for nonprofits, but also for small businesses and municipalities here in Connecticut to report any effects they have of federal cuts and federal actions as a whole, not just funding cuts. Do you think that will be an important collector of data for, not just you, but for lawmakers and the Lamont administration right now?
Yeah, I think it was a terrific idea. And in fact, we sent the same form out to our members just today and said, please, as you encounter problems with federal funding, put it down so that the state and federal lawmakers can document what's being heard.
How important is it for them to have that documentation as we move forward with, an uncertain future?
Well, it's vital, because if an organization, say Organization A, is getting cut 10% in a program and nobody knows it, they're going to be 10% down. This way, lawmakers and officials in the executive branch are going to have the ability, we hope, to look at the array of needs out there because of federal funding, based on what the response that they get.
And you can be at the Capitol and at the Legislative Office Building, which I know that you are, having these meetings. Your nonprofits have showed up and lobbied at the Capitol in the past. With this reporting tool and with this data, what do you hope lawmakers take away from this as they kind of look toward June to hopefully having a drafted budget by the end of this session? What do you hope they keep in mind?
I hope they keep in mind that nonprofits are already in crisis, and federal cuts coming on top of flat funding would turn this crisis into really a disaster for many human beings in Connecticut. Unfortunately, we have to look at it from two angles: not getting enough state funding and the danger of being cut in terms of federal funding. That's not good for the state. It's not good for the quality of life here.
And last thing from me here, you have your members, which, as you just mentioned, sending the reporting tool and having conversations. You're very active with them. But what do you want nonprofits in the state to know as well, as they're in this limbo, in this in-between, dealing with already years of lack of funding and now what's happening on the federal level?
I think for many years, there's been, some people have had the attitude that, nonprofits will do the work anyway.
Right.
And they do. They really try to do as much as they can. But we've gotten to a point where they're holding their budgets together with Scotch tape and string. And as I was saying earlier, programs are closing. People are losing their jobs. And that means that people are not getting help. There's less access to services for the people of Connecticut who need it.
Yeah. Well, Gian Carl, thank you so much, as always, for checking in with us. We'll be following this and the budget throughout the rest of the session here, so we really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
There's still more to get to here, though, on The Real Story. It's the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, which kicked off the Revolutionary War. So what's Connecticut's connection? We'll explore coming up. This is the city. In case you want a big camera, yeah.